Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show tonight. I am Brendan. That is Brandon. And we have another episode of the B&B show tonight. And it's a significant one because it might be the last one for a little while. Because we are heading into the true dog days of the offseason, where not a lot's going on. Not a lot's happening. You're just waiting for things to happen. And as of right now, it's looking like we're going to have a pretty peaceful couple of months here. So this could be the last time we meet up for a little bit. So let's make it a good one. Brandon, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. I guess this would be technically our season ender. This would be the final show of the season, so to speak, before we turn into a new season of B&B. So I'm doing well. We're definitely, as you say, getting to that spot of the off season where it seems like the days are about 48 hours rather than 24. But very excited for this future, very excited for what we're hearing coming out of camp. At least just everything's positive. Like we've talked about, we don't take a lot away from this time period there, but people are healthy. There isn't any bad news that's come down the line yet. And that all is very encouraging.
Yeah, it's looking like a peaceful offseason. I mean, we had the drama early on with the new coach having to swap out the whole coaching staff. But it's not like there are some teams out there like the Cowboys. Every day, it's like, when is CD going to get paid? When is Micah going to get paid? When's Dak going to get paid? When's McCarthy going to get extended? So there's always stuff to talk about there. But I think I'd rather have a quiet off season that doesn't involve all that stuff than whatever it is the Cowboys are dealing with right now.
Distractions, Brendan. That's what you're speaking towards. And distractions never help out a football team. They can only hurt. Can some teams overcome it? Sure. But I agree with you. It's a harbinger of potential bad things to come. And I'll tell you, that Cowboy situation to me, it's looking more and more like Jerry's softly with maybe an erasable marker kind of circling around Bill Belichick next year for that transition based on some of the things I'm reading and seeing. And it makes more sense why he's kind of putting only just maybe even barely a toe on this year's roster a little bit. The way it feels is a tiny bit.
Yeah, I have a theory about that, and I want to run it past you real quick and see what you think. Do you think he, like Jerry, do you think that he knows that if he doesn't give out these contracts and he slow rolls everything, it keeps the Cowboys in the news, and to him that's worth more than the money he would have saved if he had just taken care of these contracts when it first came up?
I would definitely say that that's somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe being a factor in his decision to have this be where it's at from that standpoint. I think it's also, though, he's looking at these deals. With CD, they're going to pay CD Lamb. I don't think there's any problem there. But when it comes to Dak or McCarthy, especially, that's the two that he comes down to, I think, and going, well, we haven't won so far. Why would I just reinvest in something that hasn't brought us that success so far anyway? And with being able to get out of Dak's deal a year from now, you and I have had so many discussions on this with paying quarterbacks and whether or not you do. And the teams that have they been happy with the contracts or have they been a bit unhappy? And with Dak and Dallas, they waited as long as they could to pay him. Now they're waiting as long as they can to give him the second contract, even though he's coming off theoretically, I guess, his best season, MVP-like season for much of it. But it just speaks to the fact that when you're spending that amount of money on a quarterback, it hinders the rest of your roster building. Buffalo Bills general manager Brandon Beane spoke about this too, Brendan, about how, with Gilmore, he was kind of silently referencing not Gilmore, but Diggs, the Diggs trade that he made, and saying how it's, you got a really good player still, but the price just gets too high and you just can't spend that with this and that. And you get your quarterback taking up that. And it really does pull you down in that way. And I just wonder with Jerry right now, he's getting older, Brendan. I think you're right on that being a part of it, but I also wonder about if I don't have the right guys in here, F it. Let me just take the year and unwind this a bit, and then come back into next year, get in Belichick, and just go that route with it.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting what they do over there. But yeah, we don't have anything like that.
No,
we don't have anybody holding out for money. We don't have anybody sitting out for a new contract. None of that going on.
We could have been in that place too if Carroll was still here. You may be seeing, and we would maybe be doing many more discussions about make or break year for Carroll. Is Carroll going to be out? Why hasn't Carroll gotten his contract extension to this point? Why aren't they, and so to your point again, it's good that we're not having to.
Right. OTAs have started, right? We've got a little bit of data from that. I guess JSN was really good today. He caught like 7 touchdowns today across the 7-on-7 and 11-on-11 drills. I guess Abe Lucas is making positive strides, and they're saying it might not be chronic after all. So that's good.
That's awesome to hear. I did a Jackson Smith and Jigba live stream show last night, Brendan, and one of the PFF deep dives of data that they showed that I thought was very interesting with him was that he had on about 90 targets last year, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 64 to 65 of those targets that were either behind the line of scrimmage or only 9 yards from the line of scrimmage. And it just kind of goes to show you a little bit in the improper utilization of him and what more he can do, because when they did send him deep, the numbers there were actually very good and efficient and productive. So, hopefully the new coaching staff learns this lesson on this, and good to hear he's taking maybe perhaps that's big leap, second year forward leap thing.
Yeah. I definitely think it could happen. I think there will be a little bit of a new sheriff in town, although Ryan Grubb does like his screen passes too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he does. I just wonder if maybe he looks to use different guys for that. Maybe you get Laviska out there flexed into that role, or Eskridge out there flexed in that role, rather than he can do it every once in a while. It's just that when you do it to where that's the thing you lean into, and you're trying to turn him into a Debo-like player in that way with it, that's where to me it goes a little bit overboard, where you're taking a guy who's got a little bit of that a part of his game and trying to make it the forefront. First, the other parts that should be made the forefront.
Right. All right. So with everything being relatively peaceful in Seahawks land right now, everything's nice and chill. There's really only one thing left for us to do, which is to finish up our deep dive into these draft picks. Last week we met and we went through the first four, the most important four probably. That's how drafts work. Yeah. We did Murphy, we did Haynes, we did Barner, and we did Knight. So now we just have to do the other draft picks, of which there were 4 more. So you ready to go with this collection of talent? Because I personally liked what we did in the tail end of the draft, more or less. I personally had mostly positive things to say and think about what we did. And I'm excited to really try to dive into this.
Yeah, I thought the third day of the draft, which they say is the day for scouts, I thought the Seahawks made some strong picks, and the value was still good throughout the draft in that third day. I think people really, their only issues, if they had any issues with this draft, was on that round 4 territory. But I think everybody's pretty universally, at least at the very least, happy to, that was fine in there. Nobody's mad at any of these picks in what they took or who they took or the value of their selection.
All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. And we're going to open things up with a guy who was one of my big sleepers pre-draft. Like, you can go back and look. I was talking about this guy very positively going into the draft. So when we picked him in the 5th round of all places, I was actually really excited. Nehemiah Pritchet of Auburn, a cornerback. This was a guy who I ended up really liking when I looked at him pre-draft, and I still pretty much feel the same way about him post-draft, having had more time to dig into him. So about average size, slightly above average arm length, really good 40 time, really good 10-yard split. That's most of what he did at the combine. He had a vert that wasn't very good, but he's fast, he's quick, he accelerates well, got pretty decent NFL size. What did you make generally of Nehemiah Pritchet?
I really love the tools with him, first and foremost on the field that stands out. He can run with anybody. He's got really nice footwork. He's got good flipping of the hips. I think DJ's even a little bit more looser in the hips overall, but this guy's still very good in his hip flipping. He stayed on top. He was asked to do a lot of that. They did play some multiple coverages. And I think what stands out in a big part of that is that while he was capably doing the cover 3 stuff, it wasn't cover 3 man match stuff, Brendan, where he had the opportunity to drive on under routes or that type of thing. It was pure cover 3 when you were really asked to drop off in that spot. But the times when you did get to see him in press and you get to see him to just purely asked to run with a guy in man covered situations, he was able to do that, I think, even better than what he did in zone. And I don't think he was bad in zone. It's partly just the calls of their zone coverage and the fact that they asked their corners to play so far off coverage on the outside that I don't know if you saw the same thing. I just found it it stood out to me versus other teams when they asked them to play that cover 3.
Yeah, there was a good amount of that. There was a little bit of allowing them to kind of, spread their wings, but I saw a lot of that too. I know what you mean.
Yeah, it was just it was a little wild to see because I know you got to be worried about those SEC receivers and that they can challenge you over the top, but they took it to an extreme degree at Auburn this past year, and it does make it harder to evaluate the corner position in these guys, and it also maybe provides a little bit of optimism for why you might think in this guy and in DJ James that there's more than they even showed you on the college film, and they didn't have bad, they had good college film, but there is even more upside than these guys because of that fact that they were restricted maybe to the scheme that they were playing within. But put him up front in a man coverage situation, let him run with it. He can do that all day. The 4.36, 149, 10-yard split. Are you kidding me with that? Where that's, we're looking for those kind of explosion scores, best case scenario. That's, you might have maybe one back or receiver in the draft that posts a 149 on a 10-yard split. So it's very, very quick with the speed, quickness and the speed and the loose hips. These things all build well together to have a guy that can play really well in man coverage situations, but then he has the background to play zone with all the cover 3 stuff that they did and all of those bail drop stuff that they did at times with their technique. So I think that this was a good upside pick. I liked him quite a bit. I saw him as a 5th round graded guy, where you're getting him. So the value was really good. I can see how you look at him as a sleeper though, because for that same reason I just said, where there seems to be something untapped there that maybe that Auburn wasn't able to get the most out of because Auburn was more rigid to their scheme and kind of having the players fit into their roles.
Yeah, I think the thing that really kind of drew me to him above other cornerbacks that were in somewhat similar positions in draft rankings would be, I think he's going to be very scheme flexible. I think he's going to be good in zone. I think he's going to be good in man. And I think he's going to be good in press. I think he's going to be able to do those things. I think his arm length is sufficient for him to be able to play press man and jam at the line of scrimmage. I think his click and close is a little tentative, but that can be coached up. I think that can be fixed. I think that can be addressed pretty easily. He's got great straight line speed and acceleration, which shows up really well in man. Like, it's really hard to get separation on this guy just in general. He's somebody who can play aggressively underneath without getting beat over the top, although Auburn didn't necessarily allow him to do that often. I do think he can do it. He also offers maybe a little bit of flexibility as a slot corner, although I don't know if that's going to be great. But I could see him maybe becoming somebody who can play in the slot a little bit down the line. So the thing that I really like about him is how much flexibility he's bringing here, because we still don't totally know what Mike Macdonald's going to want to do here. We still don't totally understand what kind of defense he's going to want to run and how much he might ask of these guys. We have some idea because we saw him in Baltimore for 2 years, but I think that there's an opportunity here that things could be a little different than what we're expecting. And I think this is a guy who's going to be able to keep up with any kind of scheme we choose to run.
Well, I think you asked on the question, which, him being able, especially in the press man zone, those 3 conceptual designs of what you'll ask a cornerback to do. I think all 3 of those things are going to be featured within the Mike Macdonald defense. And that's where he finds his way on the football field, is maybe in some of that fluidity, where typically a guy that's good in man like he is wouldn't have the zone background that he can lean back on. I think the thing that will really be the depending factor here, Brendan, is not going to be him refining technique on a back pedal or him getting better at turning around and finding the football. He does that okay. He does that sufficiently well. The thing that is going to be the make or break with him is whether or not he can clean up sometimes the lack of willingness to tackle and get in there and really be ferocious with it in the way that cornerbacks have to be in this modern age. Tackling's falling away. Teams are targeting cornerbacks to tackle. You just can't run away and hide like you might have used to been able to do 15, 20 years ago in the sport.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I noticed with Pritchet that I didn't like so much. I don't think the tackling's that good. I don't think the run defense is that good. And that's no small thing in this defense with what Macdonald is likely going to want from his corners. But I think that it is something that could be mitigated. I think it is something that could be at least somewhat fixed. And I think that the other things he brings to the table here are enough to make up for it. Again, it's a 5th round pick, right? We're not.
There's no. That's it. When it comes down to the pick, the value is exceptional. You're not going to get anybody without any couple of warts on him at this point.
Right. But yeah, the tackling is something that needs to improve, I think. I think that the ball production has been inconsistent. It's flashed. He's flashed a little bit of ball production. He's got I think last year he had, what did I put down here? Yeah, he had 3 passes defensed in 9 games last year, which is obviously not very good. The year before, he had 8 in 12 games. That's good. So it's just kind of inconsistent there. He's got 3 interceptions in 50 career games, so that's not really going to be super exciting to some people. His coverage numbers, though, even though, that thing you said about how soft he played in coverage because that's what Auburn wanted him to do, coverage numbers are really good. He's been targeted. PFF has 181 targets, and he's allowed less than 1,100 receiving yards on those 181 targets as an outside corner. Vast majority of the time he's playing on the outside. That's winning football, I think. If you're allowing like 6 yards per target, you're winning.
As an SEC corner.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right? I mean, that's the thing. Is like I tell you, can almost say that like regardless of the team you're talking about, Alabama, LSU, whoever we're talking about, I say, hey, I've got this starting LSU corner, played all the games for the team and give up collectively 150 yards in coverage basically over the course of the season. You go, yeah, that's probably a pretty good player. That's you don't get that accomplished. I guess what I'm trying to say, Brendan, by like you sort of lucked your way through it, or teams just sort of ignored you. No, you definitely had to hold your water out there to get the job done. So I think that alone speaks pretty highly of this kid and his capabilities of that. I do like his upside there, and if he cleans his tackling even to a place of just getting it to average, his coverage numbers certainly have a lot more there that he offers, Brendan, as far as his upside. I think, frankly, if he was a better tackler, you're looking at a guy, probably a 3rd round guy in this draft. I think it is the tackling that drops him down that couple of rounds. So he can cover and he can do it all. And he's scheme fluid, like you said, and I mean, 3-year starter, guy's got 2 degrees in like a kinesiology and liberal arts. So, he's also got seems like a real good head on his shoulders on top of it to be able to clean those things up and have that work ethic it takes to get better at those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Last year when they played LSU, they maybe the best receivers in college football. Obviously there are some that go 3 deep, and LSU mostly went 2 deep, but that 2 deep, those 2 guys are something else. In that game, he got targeted 4 times in 29 coverage snaps and gave up 2 catches for 29 yards. Like,
yeah, I went back and watched that game too. It was legit too. Jaden was ignoring and looking away from both DJ. Well, tell me if you saw the same thing. DJ James and Nehemiah Pritchet, he was looking away from really both of the directions unless he really felt like he had to go to target them. That's what it felt like me watching through the game. Yeah,
absolutely. Auburn's slot corner, I think the guy wears number 10. I don't know his name off the top of my head, but he's not very well equipped to handle that kind of stuff. And they picked on him a lot in both games that I watched. And most of the damage they did was on that slot corner who, I don't know. He looks like a linebacker to me. Maybe he's not even supposed to be like a slot corner. He's out there because someone's hurt. I don't know, but that's where they were looking. They were not looking at Pritchett. They were not looking at James. I thought both guys played really well against LSU and Alabama. And I know Alabama didn't have the superstar receiver this year, but they had one really good one.
Yeah, he was drafted really high. And the first game there against Alabama, Brendan, I think they had halfway through the first quarter, they had James in the slot, and then they moved James out of the slot. And to your point, they just put Neighbors in the slot, did LSU, and they targeted that kid that you said throughout a big part of the course, the rest of the game. And they were able to do it well. So, the second they bounced out, that's when I was going, oh, okay, so you guys are very well at these 2 corners here. And Jaden's obviously been instructed to look away from them, which tells you something in itself. The coaching staff thought to instruct him to do that. They even went to the running game hardly into the second quarter, started to try to lean on that, which for LSU's tape last year was highly unusual, Brendan, where they're pass happy and throwing the ball all over the place.
Right. Watching the tape as well, I felt like he was a willing tackler, just wasn't very good at it. I didn't get the sense that he just didn't want to do it. I didn't get the sense that, he's making business decisions. He's a little bit small, a little bit light. That doesn't help. And he doesn't have great technique. So it feels a little more fixable, I guess.
For me, it was a little bit more on that front of things, I would say, where I walked away from it feeling like the tackling effort wasn't always there. Getting off blocks wasn't the willingness to do that wasn't always there. If a receiver is going to fake him out on running a route, he's happy to make it look like he's going to take the cheese on the receiver taking the route run, even though it's a running play. And so I saw a little bit of that. I don't think that it's one that he has like no ability to get better on this, Brendan. So I don't want to make it seem like this isn't a thing he can improve upon. He's not small. He doesn't have like tiny arms. He's 184 pounds, 6'1". He should be, with nearly 32-inch long arms, he should be, good with that. But no, it's just, it wasn't awful, the tackling. So I don't want to make it seem like it was just, that's the thing that I do think was holding them back from being maybe taken a little bit higher in this draft, because the coverage skills are top notch.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And against Alabama, 35 coverage snaps, 5 targets, 2 catches, 13 yards. So both games that Auburn lost, and both games where they were playing really good competition, he was not the problem. He was definitely not the issue.
Definitely not. Pure fit for this new scheme, Brendan, and his flexibility. I think he is an outside guy long term. And if he can get that ability to bring up that tackling just a little bit, he really, that ups his upside to a tremendous degree, because he can run with anybody in this league, and he's not pint-sized with that ability to run with them, which is usually the little bit of the offset that you have to make in that kind of deal.
Right. So don't know if I see him doing very much as a rookie, admittedly. Like, you take a look at the corners on this team right now, there's not a lot that he would necessarily be able to do unless a lot of people got hurt, or there was some kind of surprise trade. Like, maybe, some people are saying, what if we traded Trey Brown just to clear the roster spot? What if Mike Jackson ends up not making the team? Like, maybe then, but probably not a big impact rookie.
Yeah, I think the Trey Brown thing would have to be the only thing about to happen. I think they've, with Mike Jackson and is he the guy, I keep forgetting on this, if the guy they restructured back to $1 million?
Yeah, that was Mike Jackson. I'm sorry, I meant Artie Burns. Artie Burns, I guess, could maybe go.
Artie's a possibility, and quite frankly, I think Artie's kind of on the outside looking in when you run the numbers game, because the team's going to have an intention to keep, and I think both DJ James and Pritchet, and you still have Bryant somewhere on this roster if you really need another corner to go along with the 4 other guys you got. He's going to have a hard time, I think, for Burns being a vet to make it and roll with it. But to your point again, I think it is going to be a hard time getting out on the football field, because there's so many corners out there, and he could probably benefit a year from just getting a little bit better, especially working on the tackling, get a little bit stronger maybe, and see if that can take a step forward. But long term, or even if this kid's got to come onto the field by the end of the year because the injury situation stacks up a little bit, I think he can be a player for you. And it's a good selection for the Seahawks at this point. Great value to get a guy with this kind of upside.
Right. Real quick here, Coda Dad, thank you for the $10 Canadian. Appreciate the support. There's a super sticker attached to that. I don't see a message, but thank you, Coda Dad.
Thank you, Coda Dad. Very kind of you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's bump along here, and now we're switching over to the other side of the ball. And this was a guy that I didn't really look at pre-draft. This was one of the guys I just didn't have time to evaluate. He was kind of a late riser in the drafting process. He was kind of a guy who was considered to be not particularly draftable as late as, I want to say, March. And then just in the last month and a half, suddenly he was rocketing up the boards, and he ended up going in the 5th round. It is Sataoa Laumea. Sataoa Laumea of the University of Utah. And I know that you did look at this guy a little bit. You did have him on your list pre-draft. So obviously playing right guard at Utah, he was a I think 3-year starter over there. Played some right guard, played some right tackle. You go ahead and let me know what you think of this guy so far.
Well, definitely a guy that I think even his college coaches said that he sees him as projecting to the guard level at the next level. So when we start about where he's going to go and where he's going to play, he is going to be a guard. Maybe a guy that has even a bit of an inside track towards getting out there and pushing for the left guard more than I've given credit for here through the process, this post-draft process, being that I thought that it would be Haynes that they would intend to eventually move to left guard, but it may be that it's Sataoa that is going to be the guy that they want to put into that spot. And being a guy that is a right tackle, I think it's very much kind of a shorthand thing that you can almost always do, where if a guy's played tackle and you have a very hyper athletic call for offensive linemen in your scheme on the interior, that guy should be able to do that, kicking them inside if they've been able to hold that up on the outside. And he, much like a lot of the players we're going to talk about today, Brendan, and a lot of guys I think the Seahawks have drafted through the years, has shown an ability to improve with time, to get better as the years go along. His first year out right tackle, he had originally started out as an interior player. They kicked him out to right tackle, gave up 5 sacks that first year, was just in over his head trying to learn his way and figure it out, comes back this year, doesn't give up a single sack. He is powerful and strong with his hands. Just like with Haynes, you're getting two guys that will finish you to the ends of the earth. They go, wait, what was it? Did I hear a whistle? I don't think I heard a whistle. I didn't hear that whistle. They're gonna keep giving it to you over and over throughout the course of the play. All of the ability to pull, get out in space, get out in front. He can do all of that type of stuff, hit reach blocks. Those things are going to come very natural to him once he does kick inside. Another guy who I like the upside here in this player because I think that he is going to fit really well with that transition. Has some potential at both left and right guard, which gives him some flexibility, fits to the scheme and it's in how you're setting it up. And I just think he's got a lot of upside that you really rarely are going to be able to find for a guy where they're picking at in this draft here. Part of why I liked him. I had a 4th round grade on the kid. So I looked at him as a guy that when I started to do the math, because I did the math on it, you saw him as a right tackle and so much of his tape is that. And you go, okay, yeah, but the things that are problematic for him as a right tackle, dealing with the twitchy edge that's getting around his outside shoulder, he's not going to get that twitchy edge on the inside. So how much am I going to ding that for him versus knowing that stuff gets cleaned up by just the position change alone?
Yeah, and there's a lot of that when you're trying to evaluate offensive linemen. It's like as an offensive lineman, there's a lot of branches that you can grab onto when you're falling down the tree, right? Because maybe you start at left tackle because that's the position that gets paid the most money and it's the most important. But it's like, okay, I washed out at left tackle. I wasn't good enough. And you fall down to the next branch, right tackle. Maybe you can't do that. And then you fall inside the guard. And you're like, there's so many opportunities to catch yourself as an offensive lineman if you just don't quite have what it takes. Providing that you're not like super tall or something. Like I don't think Evan Neal's going to be able to hit those branches because he's too tall and he's not quick enough to play tackle. So I think he's just kind of SOL. But for the most part, as an offensive lineman, you'll eventually find that place where you can be a good player.
Yeah. And in this guy's case too, it's also, they started him out the gate in Utah at guard and then they had a need at that tackle. So it wasn't really like, he's failed out at tackle or he started a tackle and failed and now you're kicking him to guard. It's more of, as a guard, the team in a pinch forced him out of what was his true natural position in college because it was what was best for the team. But he's now going back to what is truly his best position inside there. I know you're talking about it. That certainly is the case for a lot of guys. It's the Justin Britt kind of mold of right tackle to guard to center. But with this guy, I think it's just a little different on that because of that sort of reverse that he sort of took on this and where it makes a little more sense on him going to the inside. The other thing too is just if you want to run an athletic scheme in this day and age, I think, Brendan, and you want guys that can move in space, I don't know that you can just count on drafting those guys purely in their position from within the draft because there's not enough of them that come along that foot the bill.
Yeah. There's a lot of that going on, which is, by the way, one of the things that makes it so amazing that Christian Haynes played his whole career at right guard at UConn. A guy like that usually gets pushed out to tackle at some point because they need him.
I agree 100%. And the fact that he lasts into the depths of the 3rd round in this day and age when guards do matter so much, and especially to have a mobile guy like this is why the Byron Murphy and this pick to me are the 2 A's for me, because you got the really great value in those selections as much as the player you got.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I had, he's not a stellar athlete. He's not, but he's very experienced playing on the move. And sometimes that's more important. Like, can you hit the target square? Can you hit a moving target? Do you have the right footwork when you're moving up? That kind of stuff. That sometimes that's more important than your pure raw athleticism. So,
and as his coach talked about too, he's one of those snappy guys out of his stance that helps just a little bit too.
But kind of like Christian Haynes, this is what I said about Christian Haynes. I'm going to say it here too. I don't think he's sacrificing a ton of like strength or power because he's good on the move. He's not one of these offensive linemen that can't handle a bull rush. He can handle bull rushes. He can do leg drive stuff for run blocking. So I feel like he's pretty well-rounded. I feel like he's a pretty versatile player who should be able to make meaningful contributions on both ends of it.
I agree. I see some starting upside here in his ability long-term. And I think, like you said, he's got the fluidity of doing the mobility stuff, which is a big part of it. You can have guys that can move and be hyper-athletic, but they don't know how to hit the target accurately or how to hit the target with any kind of drive or power if they reach the spot. He can do all of those type of things. Some of that's also the finish that we were just speaking about, where I want to get out there. I want to do some damage. I'm not just trying to lay my block nicely, get the bare minimum done. I want to come out here and play after play make you feel my will, let you understand it. And he's got a couple of highlight blocks out there that show that, Brendan, where, he's looking to put guys in the dirt. And that's also how you need, that's a factor you definitely would love to have in linemen. I think that's also one, Brendan, sometimes you're not able to find that as often as you'd like, where you get guys that maybe have the athletic profile or the power or the size or the mobility, but they just don't have that internal combustion engine that runs red hot enough to really take advantage of all those skills.
Mm-hmm. I agree with pretty much all of that. He seems smart as well. He handles more complex pressure packages and twists well. And like you said, most of the issues that he has will be resolved at guard. He's got good punches. I think he uses his hands pretty well. Good all around prospect. Arm length is a little bit on the shorter side, even for a guard. It's sub 30th percentile for a guard, so not ideal. But moving him into guard, it makes it at least not a disaster, right?
Yeah, and he's got and you look at him, he's got that natural kind of wide build to him, where maybe not the arm length, but I would venture to guess that his pure reach overall outside of just the arm length is probably really good, because he's just got those naturally wide shoulders, naturally wide body that just sort of it gives you a little bit of extra, kind of a little extra built-in length seemingly at times.
Right. He does leave his chest open sometimes, kind of like Haynes, actually. I was actually surprised how many times I was watching him. Like, it kind of feels like Christian Haynes, just a lesser athlete. But again, leaving your chest open is something that I think a coach should be able to fix. Like, that should be fixable.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think he was trying to be well aware of that, losing the edge, where I think when he's playing on the right tackle, he's got the sort of the ticking clock in his head. Don't get beat around the edge, because he knew this is the place I struggle quite to get to on that athleticism front, get to those edge spots, those twitchy guys.
Yeah, and I do think that he gets out leveraged sometimes, and that's another thing that should be fixable, right? Sink your hips, get lower than your man, and life becomes a lot easier. That's something that I think should come with better instruction. So not too worried about that, but I did notice it.
Yeah, it was not a big part to me with it. I again could maybe some of this comes back to a little bit of just he's trying to make sure he's staying in front of guys, and so now some of the finer techniques get a little bit lost in the shuffle, because he's trying to just get the bigger picture stuff done. But yeah, I think once you kick him inside there, he'll be just fine.
Yeah, I went back and watched tape from 2021 against UCLA, because that was a year when he was playing right guard exclusively. And I know UCLA, obviously not a defensive powerhouse, but I was impressed with how often he was assigned up against the nose tackle and winning. Like, he would take the nose tackle one-on-one over and over, and he would just bully him at times. So that was kind of eye-opening, I think. I think that if you're trying to, get your mind around how this guy could work in the NFL as a starter, that's like where you should start, because that's the position he's probably going to play in the NFL.
That's why I've gone in my mind too to that Haynes eventually being your left guard and this guy being your right guard, because I think it's an easier transition for Haynes to make that left guard transfer. And then the point you just made about power against nose tackle strength, which can sometimes be hard to find in a right guard, he's got that. You can put him up against the Derek Browns of the world, and he's going to be able to handle those guys one-on-one. And that's a part of the really good part of his skill set, is that built in with the ability to play on the move. So I think that is where he lands at eventually. I don't know if it is this year. It would be, if it comes down to it, it'll be a hell of a battle between him and Bradford, or a hell of a battle between him, Bradford, and Haynes, though I think Haynes ends up winning out because he's just that good. But it'll be fun to see how this plays out. And the nice part is, at least now we've got some guys to be, I think, legitimately excited about. I think you and I would have always had a little bit of a hard time getting that much excited about a Damian Lewis or a Phil Haynes, or fill in the blank of the guys that we've had kind of pouring through here over the last couple of years. You're muted.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So you think this guy becomes a starter at some, this year, it's probably not this year, but down the line, you see this guy becoming a starter?
Yeah, I think you've got, some of it's going to be built upon the back of how much refinement Bradford can go between the two, because in Bradford, you have a 90th blah, blah, blah percentile athlete in what he brings. And so if you put it down on paper, Bradford's the guy that Grubb would love in an ideal world to have out there right guard. You've got that nose tackle strength I just talked about, and then you have a guy that's also able to do all the movement-based stuff that I want to have done. Sataoa has got a little bit more refinement to his game, though. He's got a little bit more of, I have 3 years of starting experience versus your 17, 18 starts Bradford coming out. And in that refinement, he may be able to be a little bit ahead of Bradford versus some of the rough edges of Bradford, where Bradford can give you some pancakes and some great blocks, but then he comes back on a couple other successive plays back to back and just completely whips or blows his block. Maybe you don't understand and has a little bit more of that acumen for manning the position, or maybe just Bradford will always be a little bit rough around the edges with that. We'll see on his development. It'll be a fun battle to watch, but that is what it'll come down to between those two, I think, camps, Brendan.
Yeah. I would love to see that. I would love to be able to have good guard play at a cheap rate, because John Schneider's already indicated that he doesn't like the way the guard market is going, where these players becoming so expensive. And looking at the most recent free agency period, I get what he's saying, right? You had Damian Lewis getting paid like 13, 14 million a year, and he wasn't even that good last year. I'd say he was probably below average. So I can already see him kind of saying, like, I don't ever want to be the team that pays a guard like that. So if we could get good guard play from guys on rookie deals for these next 3-4 years, that would be really, really valuable.
I think that's the argument you could make, Brendan, to the question of his conundrum of what he's talked about in this scenario being, okay, y'all want me to build a great offensive line, but the great athletes are going to the defensive line side of the ball. They're not going to the offensive side of the ball. And these guys come out now and they're coming out of spread-based systems as non-athletes, barely doing anything in the run game at times, playing in shotgun a predominant amount of time, and pass sets sometimes 73, 74% of the time, depending on the offense that they're in. You want me to overdraft that guy in the first, second round? I'm not going to do that. What we'll do instead is we'll try to keep doubling back down on linemen into that territory of a third round and onwards territory. I think even in the case of Haynes, the theory here would be more go fourth round and onwards, kind of like they did last year with the Bradford and the Olu picks. But they took Haynes because the value was just too good there at the end of the third round not to. Even still, that's almost kind of into the depths of the third round. You're getting closer to the fourth round at that point. So, I think he's kind of saying, hey, we'll just keep doubling down on this to build that line up. And we'll find guys that'll find their way. The cream will rise to the top. We'll find those guys that'll develop, rather than just seeking out that tried and true guy. Now, they did look for like Cooper Beebe too. We know they were trying to trade up for him in the second round of this draft. But I like their approach on this, Brendan. It's a creative solution to what I'm trying to say, and I think you agree on this, is it's a conundrum of a situation and how to address it because of those other factors that come into play.
Yeah, I think that it's the right way to do it as well. I completely, maybe left guard to a lesser extent, but I do actually kind of agree with John's general point. Right guard is not a position you should be making a massive investment into, because the value is not there. The return on investment isn't there. Like what the Panthers did, where they paid Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis all that money. One of those guys is going to play right guard, and maybe he'll be really good at right guard, whichever one ends up on that side. Yeah. I don't think you're going to get the wins above replacement level from that position that is worth the money that you spent. I don't see that happening.
And that's got to be a big factor into whether you're taking a guy or not, is as we've learned with, like, for instance, the safety position at times and how much money we've spent for the play that we've gotten out of it. You don't have to pay at certain positions to get that kind of performance. So if you're going to spend, make sure you're buying on something that's legit and true. But it's a tough position to address. It's not one like other positions that we could talk about, like defensive line or receiver or running back or corner, where you have to have a commitment to draft those guys and you can go get them. I think it's a little bit more of stickier territory when it comes to these linemen, especially the interior offensive linemen.
Mm-hmm. All right. So Laumea, I think we both like it. I think we're both on board with that one. That's a good pick. I had to reserve my judgment until after the draft so I could actually look at him, but I liked the concept. And now that I've had a look at the player, I like the pick. Yeah.
I think he's going to be a good player for us, and much like maybe Nehemiah, we're looking at him as a development guy that give him a year. But I do like what he brings to the table.
All right, so that was pick number 2 of our set that we're doing today. So 6 of 8. We got 2 more picks to go through here, and we were just talking about this guy a little bit in reference to his teammate, DJ James. So he and Nehemiah Pritchet know a lot about each other because they've been playing together for, I think it was either 2 years or 3 years. I know that DJ James started out on Oregon and transferred to Auburn. But for the last 2 or 3 years, they've been playing together. And I know Nico Thorpe was really excited about this because he played at Auburn as well. And he's in our front office now. So there was I know you read the article from Boyle talking about that. But yeah, we got teammates. We got a couple of Auburn cornerbacks here. So a lot of the stuff that you said about Auburn's cover 3 last year is going to apply here as well. So just to speak about him generally, to start things off here, about average height for a cornerback in the NFL, but he is about as light as they get. He is about as light in the loafers as you can get. He is second percentile in weight. He is not quite Emmanuel Forbes, who is now, I think, weighs like 120, if you've seen the pictures of him lately.
Yeah, he lost weight to get faster, I heard, this offseason.
That's not the path I would have taken.
Yeah, I would have been going the other way, my man, on that one. Yeah, they took a picture of me. He's got little stick arms. You're like, you're getting bullied all year as it was. It wasn't a speed problem.
Yeah. But yeah, this guy's almost as small, 175 pounds. That is very light. Short arms, 31 inches. Tiny hands, 8 3/8. Ran a pretty good combine, 4.42. So he's got pretty good speed, pretty good quickness. But yeah, what do you make of DJ James as a prospect now?
I think there's some Sataoa stuff going on with him a little bit, like watching that LSU game where you watch him inside in the slot early on in that game, and he's handling neighbors when they've got neighbors inside, and he's doing well, and then they pump him outside, and then you see the LSU team go after that slot. I feel like though DJ James can play on the outside, I feel like he's a slot guy, and that's his position long term, and that he can be a very, very good slot corner in this league, especially from a coverage standpoint. There's going to be even more questions with him, in my opinion, when it comes to at times some of the tackle stuff. I think that the effort with him is very close to atrocious at times. It neighbors on the area of atrocious. But I think when you want to ask him to play on the outside, he's more of an off-cover corner. You're going to have him playing with some depth on that. I don't think he's going to be as good up in press on the outside like Nehemiah Pritchet was going to be. In the slot is where I feel like he really shows you, though, what he can do. And though he ran a 4.42, Brendan, I think he's probably more a 4.45, 4.5 guy. He's not quite that fast. The top end speed, getting up there and down the field is great. But change of direction, the 1.5, 10-yard split right there with Pritchett. Just spoke about the fact you get a guy to 1.49, 1.50. These are elite times numbers. These are not simply, it's a good time score for the guy. There's a handful of guys maybe in a whole entire draft year in, year out that are going to put up a 1.5, sub 1.5 time on a 10-yard split. And 10-yard split is very much an example of what a slot guy is going to do. It's all within 10 yards of space and changing direction and getting back up to speed very quickly when they stop and start you or try to get you with some kind of complicated route. He's going to take those mesh concept routes, those crossing routes that the Rams love to cover with us, Brendan, that they love to run. And he really does a good job of getting up under that cover, that crossing route, and taking it away. It might look to the quarterback initially like you've got a little bit of separation there, but he closes that really well with that big point quickness he has. It's where it mainly shows up for me. And I go back in my mind, the Rams that have just destroyed us at times with those crossing route concepts. You mesh it up. Puka's going this way and Cooper's going this way, and just crossing between your defenders, and you try to create a whole bunch of traffic in there, and somebody breaks through to one side, and he's got the quickness and speed to stay in on those routes, which is harder to find in the NFL than you think. That's a lot of ways that I think that they get open. As a cup guy's not fast, but he could be quick in short spaces, quicker than your slot cornerback can be to stay with that route. And this guy will be able to stay with those type of routes. And so get him inside to the slot, to me, is his long-term, I think, best position. And I'm very excited about this because I may be one of the few people that really would like to see Devin Witherspoon more to the outside as we go on in time.
Yeah. I think that DJ James is also bringing some of that versatility to the table. I think he's got the click and close to be good in zone, and he's also got reactive athleticism to hang in man. So he won't be able to do press. His arms are too short. I don't think he'll be an outside corner in general, by the way. I think that he does project to play in the slot in the NFL because he's just a little too small. But I do think he'll be able to play man and zone. I like how comfortable he looks when he's moving around the field. I like his short area quickness. I like his twitch. His ball skills at Auburn were really good. I think he had like 18 passes defensed in his last 2 seasons combined. Much better than he showed at Oregon. He didn't play that much at Oregon. He had like 1 year where he played significant snaps.
Better than Pritchett in that respect.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. I don't think he's an unwilling tackler like you alluded to a second ago, but he is certainly a bad one. So that is going to be an obstacle for him. And it's probably going to be really hard for him to overcome that because he's so small, can't wrap up. He's got the short arms. And physically, he just probably will never be a very good tackler. It's just going to be one of those things where, they don't make him like Devin Witherspoon every time they make a corner of that size, right? There's only one Devin Witherspoon.
That's why having a rugged tackler like that is when they come out like that, it is a skill. It is a part that you add to the mix of their abilities because it is a lot of these corners that don't want it done. And we watched a lot of corners this year in this draft, Brendan. I think we scouted somewhere in the neighborhood of 45, 50 of them. And I'll tell you, a lot of them for me just didn't have that effort or willingness to. And I think that it's going to be harder and harder for those guys to just do what they could do back in the old days, which is just kind of run and hide in a scheme and ask the linemen and the linebackers and the safeties to get the job done. Offenses are too creative at targeting those corners, making them the unblocked defender, making them in a situation with the running back one-on-one on the edge where they've got to make that open field tackle that you just have nowhere to run and hide on that stuff.
Yeah, so that's going to be tough to work around. But the other thing that I'm kind of worried about with him is that in college, he was exclusively an outside corner. He has like 55 snaps in his career at the slot. So he basically has zero experience playing the slot in his career. And that's where I think he's going to end up in the NFL. I do think that he's not going to be able to make it outside. So you're basically asking him to do something that he really didn't do in college, and you're hoping that he can do it, which in theory, I think he's got enough twitch to do it, but it is not ideal when you're just making that assumption that, he'll be able to do it even though he wasn't able to do it before.
That's why you want to make this pick in the 6th round versus making in the 3rd or the 4th round. If you're going to make that kind of call and be able to, say, okay, well, if we lose out on a 6th round pick, who cares? 193rd section overall, it's no big deal at that point. That's fine. And so it's a very little risk that you're taking there for that guy in that position of, like you talk about, who can't do it. And the thing is, as we saw, is that when he was asked to do it in those moments he was put in there, he did it really well. And his skill set with that little bit of, to me, the 4.42, where it's not quite the top end speed there of a guy even like Pritchett, the shorter arms, the fact that he's got that short, bouncy change of direction, the real oily hips, where it's like, the old G.I. Joe action figures where it could just slide back and forth, and that sort of just change of direction stuff you always have to do with those slots that are always just jitterbug, just they're always doing 15 different little moves, and he can stay with every one of those little pattern moves. I think it just is kind of like a hand and glove fit when you go to the pro level at him sliding in and being able to do that stuff.
Yeah, and also speaking of his hips, I really like his back pedal. His back pedal is really, really smooth, which is, I think, going to be crucial in this defense. So there's definitely stuff to like here, but I am a little bit alarmed by how small he is. And I do think he'll have to add a little bit of weight, which is going to eat into that speed that he showcased at the combine, which was better than expected. And you already said you don't even really believe the 40 time that much. You think it's more...
Just not quite there. Like the play feels, the play speed feels more just a little bit titch below maybe 4.5. So not bad. He's not like a 4.6 guy in the field. He's not like butt slow, but he isn't quite 4.4, which is, I would consider relatively fast on a college football field where you're really feeling like the guy's getting close to just about flying at times. And I did never feel watching his tape that he was ever, and there was times guys could kind of get over the top of him here or there. 385 yards given up in coverage this past year. There were some spots in there where it was getting him up over the top.
Right. So I watched the LSU game that he played, the same game that I watched with Pritchett, and 3 targets in 34 coverage snaps, 3 catches, but only 15 total yards. He also had a pick, but it was kind of a fluky interception. It was the one where it got tipped up.
Yeah.
But again, you're going up against Malik Neighbors, you're going up against Brian Thomas Jr., and you're allowing 15 yards in 34 coverage snaps. You did something right.
You did indeed. And they, as we spoke about at the top with these two guys, Pritchet and James, in that game, LSU did two things. So they're not going to throw at those two guys as little as possible. Neither of them were highly targeted. And then we're going to try to run the ball more than we've run in other games this year. And some of that I feel like might be just a bit of an outgrowth of the fact they were playing Pritchett and James. And why go into the teeth of this defense? Let's try to attack them in other places.
Yeah, and once again, in his career, he was targeted 187 times and gave up about 1,200 yards. Like as an outside corner, I'm feeling like I'm probably winning that matchup if my outside cornerback is giving up like approximately 6 yards per target.
I agree. Yeah, I would too as well.
The other game I watched with him was the Texas A&M one because that was the game where he missed a bunch of tackles, and I kind of wanted to get a feel for what was happening with those missed tackles. There was one where he like threw his shoulder on a stretch run. He had a really good opportunity to bring him down to the backfield, but he just kind of led with his shoulder and tried to just basically, how should I put this? He basically just tried to use his force to bring him down, and it didn't work because he's too small. There was another one where it was a long run, and he had his back turned to the ball carrier, and then he tried to go get him, even though he wasn't looking at him, and just kind of slid right off of it. He was put in a really bad spot. I didn't think it was that bad, but yeah, it's a problem.
It just is a lot. I could be being a little bit harsh on him in that it's just an effort issue. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just the short arms, and he's got to learn the technique a little bit better. But it's especially when you really lock in and watch him on those blocks of the receivers and they're getting locked up. How hard? Maybe you're not able to get in there and make a play. Maybe you could do the math in your mind and be like, hey, this is on the linebackers to get this done. This isn't really on me. I'll just be over here but what if you're also the guy that's fighting off those blocks, trying to throw that wide receiver away? The stuff we saw from Devin Witherspoon last year. What if I can get a couple of corners, multiple corners of my defense that are doing that? Not just one guy that's doing it, but multiple guys. And what did we have last year a little bit? And a guy in the Tariq Woolen that sometimes looked a little hesitant on his willingness to tackle. And then on the other side, you have a guy like Witherspoon being willing to be rugged and get after it. And I think you've got to kind of stack a multitude of these guys up on the field to get better at tackling, to get that as an instilled byproduct of your team and what you expect. So with both Pritchett and James, less so, I think, with Pritchett, more here with James, because in the slot, you're going to have to do your tackling. You got to play like a Sam linebacker sometimes in this modern NFL as a slot corner. Going to have to be able to tackle. But I'd love to see his emergence in this place, Brendan, because it then frees Devin up. Devin can play in the slot. He can play great in the slot. He can maybe be the best slot in the league. But if you can get a really good slot in there, and there's a choice, I think, in McDonald's mind between having Witherspoon being able to, where it's kind of equal, right? His impact can be equal between, his preference, I think, would be then to have him over on the outside.
Yeah, especially if you have another guy that's really good in the slot playing cornerback. I think you would, because, well, I don't know. What do you think is harder to find in the modern NFL? Good slot corners or good outside corners?
I think good outside corners are the harder to find, especially guys that can play both zone and man, like Witherspoon can play.
Yeah, that's probably true, because in order to play outside, you typically have to have long enough arms. You have to be big enough. Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah. Whereas I think there's a lot more of these guys at that 31-inch long arms, sub 6 foot tall, like your DJ James running 1.5. I mean, this guy has posted pretty good scores at a 4.4 and a 1.5, and not tiny, but drops down to the 6th round, because I think teams kind of do that math of and like you say, even though he didn't play slot in the college level, they're doing the math saying, yeah, but your slot is just only really what you are at the next level, probably.
Right. All right. So I think that's really about all there is to say with DJ. Pretty good pick. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with going this way when you get down into that 6th round area. I got no objection to it.
No, I think this is a great pick for us, and we need to get some reinforcement in there for Witherspoon. Burns obviously is kind of your backup slot guy, or Kobe Bryant right now. So get you another guy in the mix for the competition, and another guy like Pritchett. You're getting some really good upside. He may not be a guy that gets the upside. Pritchett may not, but they are guys with upside that you're getting on day 3, which tends to be something that's tough to find. You tend to be grabbing something of, well, this guy can do just this, and then the skill set's limited around that. It doesn't tend to be, hey, there's some actual legitimate upside on this guy and what he can bring.
Okay, so we got one more guy left, and this one probably won't take very long, because it's hard to say much about this one. Hard to really speak on this one, because there just isn't that much out there to go on. The most that we know is that there's a scout in the Seahawks organization that must really, really like him, because this clear UDFA level prospect, ends up getting picked in the 6th round because we wanted to make sure we got him, which, in fairness, I think a lot of teams do that with their last pick of the draft. They have a guy who they really like, who they know is UDFA caliber, but if he gets to UDFA, then he gets to pick wherever he wants to go. He might not want to come to your team. So you pick him to make sure you actually have him. So nothing wrong with that. I don't have an objection with it. Michael Jerrell of the Findlay Oilers, which I think is in Ohio, if I remember correctly when I looked into this. I think it was Ohio. So played right tackle at Findlay, at least. 25 years old when the season starts. 6'4", very short for a tackle. 309 pounds, little bit on the lighter side. And his pro day, which I think they did a joint pro day with Ohio State. Some of the small schools do that. His numbers were freakishly good. His numbers were really, really good and indicated a really good athlete. And that's why we're here right now. So do you think that athleticism is going to result in anything when the football game starts?
I think the battle is going to be a tough one for him to get through on this one with Brendan. And the reason being is that the Seahawks tackle situation is in better shape than it's been in recent years, not just at the starter position, but with the depth and where it stands, so that it narrows down the pathway for him to go and make the team. The team has, I think, in a lot of ways, as a lot of these picks are I think, examples of, gone to look for the upside on this guy. And are the chances of him hitting that upside, small school guy, and how often does this really happen? Is it likely to hit? No, it's not a likely to hit situation, but it is a one where that upside is also there in this kind of player, where, he was a guy that had opportunities to be able to leave in the NIL portal. It's a little bit like the Quinyon Mitchell situation at Toledo, where he could have gone to another bigger program, but instead decided to show loyalty and remain where he was. And they had faith in him to bring him there. And so he was going to have faith back in them to remain, which is a great character, part that we see from him on that. But the athleticism, the be able to move, supposedly going through those drills on that Ohio State day, he was moving better than any other Ohio State lineman on the field that was testing that day. And so this guy can move, and that's part of what you need in this new scheme, is guys that can do that. But can he overtake? You're going to talk about one of your UDFA guys here in a second that's going to be pushing even him here. On top of, you have Stone Forsythe coming in, who's in a contract year and is going to come out there hungry as hell, I'm sure, trying to be at his best to try to see if he can get a team that maybe he can trick into this offseason to giving him a starting contract type money, not big money, but starting contract money. It gets tough with George Fant also in the mix of it, but. The movement based, he checks the boxes for the requirements of what you need at the position in the Grub offense.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about that. Stone Forsythe played admirably last year, right? He was, I'm not going to say he played good, but he played heroically in a situation that was pretty tough. But he's not really a fit for what we're probably trying to do, right? He doesn't really have those movement skills that you're looking for in a Ryan Grubb, Scott Huff offensive lineman, probably, right?
Probably not purely not to the degree of Jerrell, to your point on that. They're two different style of athletes that you're talking about there. That's for sure. But I think Stone had overall a pretty good year last year in what we asked him to do. I mean, again, I've always thought of him as being coming into last year as a pure left tackle, Brendan, and we had that guy over there playing the right side, which, for him to hold up over there was a shocker to me just in the first place, that he could even be workable out there past having some games where he was actually pretty well graded and holding up, reasonably well.
Yeah. So one thing I'm wondering, what if Forsythe gets traded or cut just because we don't think he's a good fit? Not an indictment of how good or bad he played last year. What if we just decide he doesn't fit what we do? It's a contract. Let's let him go somewhere else. I mean, that's got to be at least possible, right?
Oh, it's on the table on this. And I'm not saying I'm highly predicting Stone makes the team, because the point you make on that is one that can't be ignored, is that the cost comes into factor into this. A UDFA on your active roster versus Stone Forsythe going into year 4. there's probably $1.5 million difference of a deal there on the books. And that may not seem like a lot, but when you're at this point where we're needing to create whatever cap space we can, it can weigh in quite heavily. Is there a team that would trade for him? Maybe. You're not getting a lot, but is there, could you get a 6th round pick for him or something if a team's out there needing some tackle help? Sure, you certainly possibly could. So, but I also think he's going to come in with that. I've been in this program 3 years. Michael Jerrell, you're coming in as a rookie. It's one of those spots where it's hard as a rookie to come in there and unseat that other guy when he's had so much of that experience, even if you're the better, maybe athletic fit.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because if Forsyth makes the team, it's hard to figure out where there's room for Jerrell, I'll admit. Now, I don't think we drafted this guy with the intention of not having him make the 53-man roster. This is the kind of guy that you find a way to make room for, but then it's tough because you've got Lucas, you've got Fant, you've got Cross, you've got Forsyth. Maybe you could carry a 5th tackle, but most teams don't unless that tackle has like guard flexibility.
I think they're going to try to eventually get him stowed onto the practice squad. I think that the thinking here is that you bring him in and you sell him on your organization. You get him acclimated to the situation. You say, look, we'll be a year out from now. It's a little bit like, I think, Brendan, what you could tell the guys like Hayden Hatton, where you say to him, look, Westover, where you say, look, you just need to hang tight here for a year because a year from now, there's going to be a direct hole opened up on this roster you can go and fill. And we don't necessarily go out there and have to seek that if we've got you in house. You've got your pathway to making the roster and having impact into the future. And if I was John Schneider, that's exactly what I'd be telling these guys and saying, okay, well, right now you might have to stay on the practice squad for a year, but this guy's out after the year. This guy's on the 1 more year deal. This guy's, just a rookie here. So you've got your spot here to go and get it if you can just hang tight on that.
Right. So to give an idea about Jerrell's athleticism, he ran a 4.9 4.40, which is 95th percentile for tackles. 32.5-inch vert is 90th percentile for a tackle. So he is a phenomenal athlete for the position. If as a tackle, if you run a sub 5-second 40, it's something special. But if it's sub 4.95, that's something that you might only see once every couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And movement's at the forefront now in this scheme. So having a guy that can do that stuff is all the more valuable than it would have even have been in the prior.
Mm-hmm. And as for his career, mostly it's been over the last 3 years. I guess because of COVID, some colleges did like 2 seasons in 1 year. Mm-hmm. They did the spring league and then they did a fall season. And the spring season was like 6 games, and then the fall season was 12 games. It was really weird what they did. I'm not sure exactly, but he made first team all GMAC 3 times. He made All-American a couple times. The All-American for the conference that he was in, to be clear. Obviously, he's not making All-American for like all of college football. 2A
or something like that.
Yeah. He was also the GMAC Offensive Lineman of the Year last year, so pretty notable. Never missed a start in his career. Once he became the starter at Findlay, did not miss a start. A lot of guys that we drafted this year, very, very durable, did not really miss a lot of time out there, so pretty cool. I like the fact that he's short. I'll say that. That's going to help in the leverage battle. I do wonder if he could end up being somebody who progresses very quickly because he has never had access to coaching like this before. It's going to be such a massive switch going from the coaching he was getting at Findlay to the coaching he's going to get here that I wonder if it could just be like a light switch going on almost.
It's possible on that. It's hard to predict though, necessarily that's where it'll go with it because there's also the difference of competition level you're going up against where from Findlay to the pros is as big a jump as you can make.
Mm-hmm. Quick off the snap, lower body bend, moves explosively, some ability to play in space on like counters and stuff like that. So I get it. I understand the appeal. This is the kind of player that I'm always kind of maybe even a little too excited about, right? Like I look at a player like this, I think about what could be, and what could be with a guy like Michael Jerrell is off the charts because he's such a good athlete at his size.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Oh, it's what you like most about all these picks. I think day 3 is I like going for upside on day 3. I like, hey, it's, whether we can haggle over the chances of them hitting that spot or not, but I just like that you go for that. You're going for that big swing. And you mentioned he's out in Ohio, and you look at the UDFAs you signed, that the prime ones from the Westover to Holani to Greenberg out in the Midwest, most of them Midwest to West guys. Roe Torrance out here on the West. So, this is a guy that you probably knew other team was going to be able to pick him maybe a bit closer out to where he played out in college, and we weren't going to have that inside track. And it starts to all add up in your mind, and you get a guy like this that can play that left tackle. And if that does hit for you, what that brings to your team, having a guy under contractual control at that point for the next couple of years, if he can be that kind of player, and how that could impact the decision-making of Cross with his contract potentially coming up within a year or definitely 2, definitely helps the Seahawks out to have some of that flexibility if he can develop into that guy.
Right. Now, technique all over the place. Pass protection, doesn't really have a lot of cohesion between his hands and his feet. Doesn't understand angles that well. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be worked on. A lot of stuff that needs to be fixed here. But that's that's what you're signing on to do when you draft a guy like this. I assume you watched his YouTube highlight reel.
Yes.
That's like all we have to go on. I mean, it's a highlight reel, so you can't really learn that much from it. I was good. I mean, he looked good, right?
No, he does look great. It's just, to me, it gets impossible when you're looking at some of the athletes that are going across from him, where it's guys that aren't just anything close to the NFL caliber of athlete. And so it becomes kind of just a shot in the dark. That's where I think it's less even than the tape of what he showed to the Seahawks, and more of even how he looked out there on that Ohio State pro day and how he was moving, especially when you had the ability to sort of compare that to the Ohio State linemen that were out there. And that, as much as anything, I probably got their attention, along with the tape being good enough. I mean, he's out there dominating. Don't get me wrong. He's out there throwing guys out of the club, but he's it's not it's not a thing that I think you can make much of a determination on how that translates then to the NFL doing that.
I liked how he looked when he climbed up to the second level on some of those blocks, I guess. Like, that should translate.
He can move. No, he can move in space. I got no doubt about all the aspects you're going to ask a guy to do. If you want to get him out in the screen game and get out there and get that block laid, he can pull out there in space and get out to hit it. So he's got the mobility, which is at the forefront of the requirement and what you need in a lineman. It's not, I need maulers that can blast guys off the ball. Yeah, you'd like to have that, but you need mobility first at the forefront of this scheme. And then it's nice to have the mauler as the second or third thing, which that's the benefit of having guys like Sataoa or Christian Haynes, is you've gotten those best of both worlds type guys.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's all we got to say about him right now. That's about as far as we can go. There's some real talent there. It's not super likely he ever makes the most of that talent, but it's possible. And that possibility is very, very intriguing.
It really is. If he can hit it, we're in a good place. If he happens to hit that kind of on that talent or on that physical potential, I guess.
Real quick, Upo, thank you for the $10 super chat. No comment, just showing appreciation. Well, thank you, Upo. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Upo. Very kind of you.
All right. So that's it for the picks. We do have undrafted free agency. We're not going to go super in depth here the way we did with the draft picks, but there are some guys that are worth going into here. And I think we both have a pretty decent idea of the players in this UDFA pool that are likely to matter. There are plenty of guys that are here because we need 90 players for the offseason roster. Because when training camp starts, you need all that depth. You need all those bodies that are not going to make the team. But there are some guys here that really do have a chance to matter. So, ready to talk a little bit about a subsection of the UDFAs?
Yeah, let's dive into them.
So, I'm going to lead off with the guy who I think will make this team. And in fact, I'm actually quite confident that he's going to make the team because we clearly have a need for a player like him. And we clearly have space on the roster. And it just makes too much sense. So I'm going to go out and say that George Holani will make the team. He will be a 53-man guy. And I'm going to say he plays a little bit this year. He's going to get on the field a couple of times, at least. George Holani, Boise State running back. What did you think about what you saw from the Boise State Bronco?
Liked a lot of what I saw from George Holani. He's a very strong, hard-nosed runner, 210 pounds, 5'11". Not a big guy, but he runs big, a little bit bigger than his size, I think, at times. Very, very good about getting lateral, and he tends to get downhill pretty quickly, but when he needs to kind of bounce lateral, he can get lateral with it really well, I thought. Really good contact balance. Kind of has that thing a little bit like Chris Carson did back in the day, where a guy could get down low and kind of drive their shoulder into his waist, and he's able to sort of bounce off those tackles. When the guy doesn't fully get the wrap up, he will punish guys that don't wrap up. He also has a really good job, I think, Brendan, of with the feet through traffic thing, where guys come and try to upend those running backs and they're diving down and diving for their ankles. And he does a good job of keeping his feet clean when he's trying to get down the field. And he's got just enough burst, maybe not as much speed, but really good burst. And I agree with you. I think that he is going to make the 53-man roster and be the fourth running back on this roster. 1,157 yards in 2022, 5.2 yard per carry average. Came back this year and missed 6 games due to an injury. I think you could make a pretty sound argument that if he didn't have that injury and he was able to put together the year that he had already started to build upon, because he had 134 carries for 748 yards in total that last year, but put that 6 games of production in there, and he's probably up around the 1,300 yard mark, building on the 2022 season. And my bottom line on this is he's going to be drafted at that point, probably. That injury very much was maybe the one factor that caused him to kind of get sliced off in this draft and not quite be taken. But also, guys, good share catches over the past 2 years, 24 catches in 2022, 17 catches last year in that more limited role of the 6 games being reduced down. But a guy that I think gives you a pretty nice little full skill set for what he brings, and gives you a little bit of juice. I think there's some legit upsides. Even legit upside, I'd argue that I don't know if I necessarily saw in a guy like DJ Dallas coming out, who we took in the 4th round. I think there's a little bit more in this guy's tank.
Yeah, I feel pretty confident that Holani would have gotten drafted if he wasn't injury prone. Like if he had a healthy collegiate career, he would have been drafted for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The reason why I like Holani so much is that he's a power back. And that's kind of what I feel like we need. I want somebody who can run with power. Like I know some people think Charbonnet is a power back. I don't really look at Charbonnet like that. To me, he's a 3rd down back. But Holani, I know he's a little bit small, but he's got a very stout build, can withstand contact. And he's really good at making sure he squeezes out extra yards when he's getting tackled. He's really good at falling forward, getting the extra yards. Ball security has gotten better over his career. He's pretty reliable in that regard now. He understands like how to get underneath the pads of players when he's got the ball, use leverage to squeeze out a few extra yards. And like you said, yeah, pretty good route runner, pretty good pass catcher. It's not elite or anything like that, but it works. Mm-hmm. So this is the kind of guy that I wanted to come away from in this draft or UDFA. A genuine power back. So I like the way he runs as well. It's one cut and go. He's like an old school Mike Shanahan running back in that way. Like he sees the hole, he makes his cut, he's gone. Well, probably won't be gone that often because he's not that fast, but he's going to get what's there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, to me, this is a guy who would have been a day 3 pick if only he just could stay healthy. And that's the concern with him. Not durable, multiple injuries suffered in his career. Not a very elusive player, and he's got to get better in pass protection. But I really like this one, and I'm excited to see what he can do as a rookie, because I do think he will be out there in some capacity, and I do think that he has something to offer this team.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at your ideal on a 4th back, if you've got to use him, you go, if we got to call on this guy for a game or two to carry the workload because injuries beset us for a little bit of time during the season, can we do that with a guy? And with George, I think you definitely can. I do like his power elements. I do think he gives you a little bit more elusiveness, than that. I do think Charbonnet is a power back. I do think that he's definitely can give you some elusiveness. I don't discount what you're saying as far as his ability as a 3rd down back, but I do think that he's also one of those backs in this league. If you look around the league right now, Brendan, these guys have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. I think Charbonnet is in a little bit of a unique position for the kind of power he can bring to the position versus other backs you see across this sport. But I think Holani finds a role on this team as that 4th down back. And if you have to bring him in on that starter for a game, give him 15 carries and a couple touches out of the backfield, I'd feel confident that he can give you productivity. Now, maybe he gets injured after that one game, But as we saw with Carson on this, you speak about him. A little bit of it is as I think about the shades of watching and seeing Chris Carson on tape with him a little bit and how he run with his style. That of course with Chris, he had that injury history going back to high school and when it was happening through college, and it doesn't tend to just resolve itself magically in the pros. But fourth back on the roster, not counting on this guy to become a pusher to the starting role. It's great to get that value as a UDFA, and I agree with you. This is one of my highest graded UDFAs that we grab because of the fact that I think he finds a role and finds productivity with your Seahawks.
Yeah. So I watched his tape against Washington last year, and the pass protection needs some work. He goes low a lot. I think he even drew a penalty on one play because he tried to take out a pass rusher at the knees, and it ended up being a 15-yarder. So a little bit of stuff that needs to be cleaned up just a bit, but I would say that as a running back, he shows the attributes that you need to be a serviceable player in the NFL.
Agreed. Totally. And can maybe fit into a couple of roles like that. Maybe a guy that can eventually carve out. If he can I agree with you on the pass protection, probably got a little more cleaned up on that. But he at least does give you the good certain hands and pretty dynamic as a pass catcher with the yards he was getting. And I mean, averaging 11 yards a catch out of the backfield last year for running back, which is pretty nice. Those guys, you're just catching the flat and run out of bounds after 5 or 6 yards. So he's got a 40-yarder, 45-yarder on his books on the catches. So he gives you this little dynamic out of the backfield too. But I like this kid. He's a fun running back to watch on the tape.
Randy McDaniel, thank you for the $4.99. Brando, greatest interview today. Came across prepared and professional. It flowed really well from beginning to end. Second of many to come, I think.
Oh, well, thank you, man. I appreciate that, Randall. I had a great time today, Brendan, talking with Randy Mueller, former Seahawks general manager. So it was it was a lot of fun to go back and dive into some of the old stories. And, were we going to take Randy Moss and, why didn't we? And, why this decision? How to get Rick Meyer trade made? It was fun to kind of get in a little bit of a peek behind the curtain on that. But thank you, Randall.
I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but sounds pretty cool.
I tried to get into some team, man. I tried to get into some, was Bearing the guy that overruled Knox on Brett Favre. And I tried to get into a lot of those kind of things I've always wondered about for years on some of this stuff. And he was very open about his answers, which was cool.
Yeah, I guess at this point, it doesn't really matter that much, right? Like,
no,
none of those, like Bearing doesn't even own the Seahawks anymore. He's not the GM anymore. There's nothing to hide. He's like the Irishman on his deathbed, finally admitting that he killed.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, he can give you all the scoop on stuff that you'll never get to know at the time. You have to wait that sort of 20 years to kind of fully get the final, it was interesting hearing him talk about the 97 play with Testaverde, which that was the play that basically reinstituted, about that one where it reinstituted replay.
I remember that.
Yeah. And he was talking today about being up in the suite in the Meadowlands and all of the NFL people that were in the room there. Like, once the play happened, like all their heads dropped and like everything got silent and they all just kind of like left the room and they were like, they knew and felt so bad about the play in the moment.
Yeah.
But thank you, Randall. It was I would love to do more of those interviews with those guys if we can. And I just scratched the surface with Randy. I could have probably kept him for 4 hours, Brendan.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. There's some interesting stuff that, especially again, once they're willing to discuss it, once enough time has passed to where they feel like they don't have the need to hide anything.
Yeah, but you understand why they need to hide it at the time. But once you're past it, no need to hide it. Let everybody know. What was like Randy Moss, for instance. At the time when I'm watching him, my young heart, Brendan, was broken because I wanted Randy, and I'm like, we're gonna get Randy, and confirm a little bit more. The baggage was to the roof with Randy. It was both with his time in Florida State and with Marshall, and that's what drove that. Not the fact that we couldn't see his talent, which we definitely could.
Yeah, I don't know how happy Randy Moss would have been with John Kitna throwing him the ball anyway.
No, and I think it's another part of Randy's success was getting paired with Chris Carter. Chris Carter being a guy that could take a guy that had Chris Carter was a guy that was first with the Eagles and had kind of like a little bit of a drug problem and cleaned it up with the Vikings, and so he could kind of maybe keep Randy on the straight and narrow a little bit, saying, "Hey, this happened to me, and it almost upended my career." And I don't think we had that same kind of steadying presence necessarily to provide Randy at that time.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Randy. And I'll check out the interview when I get the opportunity to.
Thank you, man. And appreciate you, Randall. Very, very kind of you. Thanks for listening to that. And I want to do more of those, man, for sure.
Zen Lunatic, thank you for the $20. So, Brendan, did you get the answer to your question? Is Byron Murphy being disrespected? Right. So, I made a video a few days ago because there's been kind of this burgeoning subplot with Byron Murphy that's been building up since we drafted him about this perceived disrespect that he's been getting since we drafted him. Example was the rookie showcase. He didn't get invited. Right. They invited it was like more than 20 rookies, I think. And he was not one of the ones who got invited. Now, most of the guys who got invited are offensive players and the guys who are going to draw a lot of attention in a way that Byron Murphy's not. So I kind of get that. And then you had just the way he's being talked about, like defensive rookie of the year. He's not really being talked about at all. Like there are Instagram posts where they're like, who do you think is going to win defensive rookie of the year? And then they'll list like 10 defensive players and none of them are Byron Murphy. If you go to betting odds on defensive rookie of the year, he's currently 6th behind a bunch of edge rushers. And I think I want to say Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, something like that. And I basically just made a video talking about it and, saying players like Byron Murphy usually don't win rookie of the year. These guys who don't put up monster stats individually, they usually don't. So I understand it. Like they're setting the odds. They're not trying to say what they think should happen or what they would like to see happen. They're probably looking at it and going, Byron Murphy is a guy who didn't put up big stats in college. And if he continues to be that in the NFL, without those big stats, he's not going to be a serious defensive rookie of the year candidate.
How about this angle on top of it, though? He's unlike what you have with Quinyon Mitchell or Dallas Turner or a couple of these other guys that might be above. He's not due to be your starter. I mean, doesn't that kind of affect it as well? As if you're going to be defensive rookie of the year, don't you kind of need to be the starter on your team in order to get that done?
I mean, either that or you come off the bench and you're really, really good. Like, I think one year, the year the Bears went to the Super Bowl, they had a rookie defensive end, Mark Anderson, who was coming off the bench, but he had like 14 sacks. And I think he won defensive rookie of the year that year. So that's what it takes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a rarity though. Like that's happened once in probably like 40 years of defensive rookie of the years. I don't think that's been like we've seen 5 or 6 of those type of things happen. So I think if I'm Vegas, I'm putting the odds together. I would be putting the odds together the same way, where it's not disrespect. It's just between the fact that, like you say, he doesn't have necessarily epic production coming out of college, but also that he is going to be behind the depth chart on minimum Williams and maybe some snaps in there with Draymond Jones at times. That it's just going to be hard to get enough swings there to go out there and win it.
Yeah. I looked at the history of defensive rookie of the year in a video, like the last 30 years or so. And it's very rare that a defensive tackle that occupies blocking attention, like that's his main skill set, wins defensive rookie of the year. It's usually edge rushers. It's usually cornerbacks. Occasionally it'll be like a safety, I guess. But when it is a defensive tackle, it's somebody like Namdeka Suh, who had 10 sacks as a rookie. That's very different than a guy like Byron Murphy, who is probably not going to be a big sack guy because he wasn't even that in college.
No, it wasn't his necessarily forte in college, and some of that was a little bit of the use. And I think he does have some potential to give that production at some point in time. And if, look at Brent, if he was starting, I think if he was posted to be your starter as a 3-tech this year, that I'd say he's got every bit of right to be mentioned right there with Quinyon Mitchell and a couple of these other guys. But the fact that he's not, and that he's probably going to end up Quinyon Mitchell's snap count this year versus Byron Murphy's snap count is probably going to be Byron Murphy about 2/3, maybe maybe even less than that, maybe 2/4 of Quinyon Mitchell's snap counts. It's just going to be tough to do enough to be able to get in there, I think, to make that noise. He still might make a lot of noise on those snaps and be very impactful on it, but it's a little bit of the benefit of having Williams here is that you're not forced or rushed to do that. Aaron Donald won defensive rookie of the year himself, but they didn't have a starter at 3-tech for him to slide in there and go play at. He got to come in there and play. And you can find always, as I say, exceptions to the rules, but then that doesn't make them the rule. That makes them the exception.
Yeah. The one guy I found that was like maybe an analog for Byron Murphy winning defensive rookie of the year was Sheldon Richardson. He won defensive rookie of the year in a year where he only had like 3.5 sacks, Murphy could do that. I could see Murphy getting like 3.5 sacks, but it doesn't happen very often. And looking at it this year, like you got a guy like Latu, who's probably going to be a starter in Indy day one. Dallas Turner could start. I guess it depends on how Minnesota views him versus him as a project getting to play, because he is going to be rough around the edges. Jared Verse is probably going to get to play a lot because the Rams don't really have a ton going on at edge in front of him.
Well, and you look what they did too with Byron. Who's the guy they drafted last year? Byron. There were two guys with the same name in that draft, so now I can't remember either the name on it. But,
Byron Young.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Byron Young, and he was, when we watched the tape, talking about him how kind of rough he was coming out. Neither you nor I, we liked his upside, but we didn't see him being an instantaneous guy day one, which they were able to get out of him. So, to your point on Jared Verse, I think that's a very feasible possibility with Verse being that guy too.
Yeah, and last week ESPN projected which rookies were going to lead in various statistical categories. Like they were predicting like stat lines for, here's Caleb Williams, here's Bo Nix, here's Rome Odunze, et cetera. And they did, sacks. What will be the top 5 rookies in number of sacks? And Verse wasn't on the list, which also kind of rankled people. But again, he's not going to be a big sack guy compared to the edge rushers. And everybody they had in that top 5 was an edge rusher. Those guys are going to get more sacks. And
people are, unfortunately, when it comes to defensive rookie of the year voting, that's where a lot of, I think, the voters end up going to. It doesn't become about watching the tape and watching the impact and seeing what you've done. It becomes more usually about, we got 9.5 sacks, and there's your defensive rookie of the year. We got 4 interceptions, defensive rookie of the year. It becomes very, I think, simplistic from the voters' mindset on this. They don't look at it with maybe the layers we'd like them to look at it to make that kind of evaluation. Like you're saying, to have a guy like Murphy who can become that guy. And so it's, I don't take too much away from that myself with it, where it'd be nice to get defensive rookie of the years and all that. But I also know that there's so many things that go into it that's far beyond just the evaluation of the players and handing those awards out. And then at that point, it lessens the award to me, because the award in theory is about the guy that's the best player. And that would be about taking in some of these layers and not just stat bot watching, but it's indeed, I think, the other, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I don't think we really need to care that much. The only thing that matters is that we get players that we like and players that are good and players that help us win. And if they don't get properly decorated by the rest of the league, that doesn't change what they are.
Amen.
Thank you, Zen Lunatic.
Thanks, Zen. Appreciate you.
All right. So next UDFA I want to spend a minute on is Jack Westover. And admittedly, this guy has no path to the active roster because we're not going to carry 4 tight ends. There's no way. And there are 3 guys solidly ahead of him. But to me, Westover is very clearly going to make the practice squad and very clearly going to be part of the plan in 2025. So I was very interested in him. Now, I'm pretty familiar with him because I watched every snap of his career, as a Huskies fan. But let's talk about him anyway, even though most people here are going to know what's up.
Yeah, he's right there with me with George as my 1-2 punch for my 2 guys I'm most excited about. I feel very confident both these guys finding their pathway to, at the very least, getting to the practice squad on this roster. As you said, there's really no realistic spot for him to make the roster unless there's an injury with the other tight ends. But when you do look long-term, and I'm sure the sales job that John said to him is say, why leave home, stay with your hometown team, stay on the practice squad, have a year in an NFL weight room and program to get your body even better at its best of shape. Come back that next year. We'll have an open roster spot for you to be that 3rd tight end as Pharaoh Brown becomes then a free agent. And you can come in there and compete with AJ Barner for those snaps. Not to mention, we may have a decision to make on Noah Fant at that time, a year from now, where we can save a tremendous amount of money if we're not happy with the contract at that time, even opening your pathway that much further. He is a guy that I think is easy on the surface to look at and say he's just a Jacob Hollister type guy who will be a pass catching guy here and there, and that's about all he gives you as far as an upside. I think that he's a guy that can add a little bit of weight and actually be a decent blocker for you. He's not going to be Barner or Disley kind of blocker for you, but he can be more capable, I think, than Hollister was, who I think was pretty much a non-entity when it came to any of his blocking ability. And I love what he brings as a pass catcher. The kid's just a football player out there. He runs pretty good routes, understands how to really just sit down in zone and finds those spaces, but love how he elongates his catch radius by having really sticky hands and an ability to extend his hands away from his body and bring those balls in where it's wild to watch, even going back and looking at some of the UW games from last year now, Brendan, to kind of trying to do a little bit of some research here for Grubb and the offense and sequencing of plays and how he's going to set things up. And just wild to watch how many times they got into those third and 3, third and 4s, 4th and 2s. And here you got Penix dropping back and he goes to Westover and it's not a good throw. And Westover's got to pick it up off of his shoe tops or, have reached back as he's going the other opposite way and made all those catches. Every one of those big catches he seemed to make at every point last year when they needed it. And just that stands out to me as well, where, again, you make a comment back to Hollister a little bit with it, where Hollister didn't have really any catch radius. He had to be open. If there was contested catch situations or the ball was thrown out away from him, he wasn't going to reel it in.
Yeah, he has a lot of that. A lot of those big time catches outside of his catch radius that he just goes and gets. That's the main thing that allowed him to have a presence on this team over the last couple of years. His ability to just go and get the off-target pass. And on 4th and short or 3rd and short, he is definitely somebody that Penix always looked to dial up, it felt like.
Yeah.
And that's on a team with great receivers, some of the best receivers in the country.
Yeah. Spoke to how much he trusted his hands there in that spot to go to him, because you have guys that were such sure-handed receivers out there on that outside, but he knew the defense wouldn't be moved over to, they did their concentration probably beyond those wide receivers, and he knew and trusted that Westover could make those grabs, and the kid did.
Mm-hmm. Certainly a smaller player in pretty much all areas in terms of his size. He is near the bottom of the percentile list. He's 6'2" and 5/8, which is 8th percentile, 243 pounds. So you're going to have to find the right ways to use him. Like, I don't think he's going to be able to line up in line in the NFL very much. I don't think you're going to be seeing much of that. And that's a good chunk of what he did in college. So you are going to have to find different ways here. But he lined up in the backfield quite a bit in his career. He lined up in the slot a lot. He lined up wide a lot. So he's already got experience being kind of a utility player. So I don't think it's impossible for him to be able to find a way to contribute that doesn't involve lining up as an inline tight end. I think he's a good route runner. I think he understands zone defense and knows how to find the hole and sit down in it. I think he knows how to help his quarterback, work your way back to the quarterback, get open, present a target to him. He understands that stuff, and the quarterback's under duress. Rewatching some of the tape with him, one thing that I noticed is that even though he was rarely targeted down the field, ran a lot of routes down the field. He would run go routes. He would run like routes 20, 25, 30 yards down the field and look pretty good and get open. And it was just a thing where Penix is not really a big fan of the middle of the field. So he was always looking to push it outside the numbers to his really, really good receivers. So I'm wondering if maybe there's a little bit of upside there as a downfield threat that we didn't see that much of at UW, because Penix was always like, okay, how can I get the ball to my receivers? Because his receivers are so good. So I do wonder if there might be a little bit of untapped potential there.
It's a good point. And certainly could very well be the case with him, where there's only so many balls to go around. And as it was, Grubb did a great job of keeping those receivers worked in with their production and their touches. And that was going to probably limit him on that. He did the most of what he could with what he was given. And I think, to your point on those route concepts, a lot of him running deep was to run off that safety coverage with his trailing defender and then create the openings for those receivers in what Grubb was trying to set up. But Grubb also, this is the nice part of having the college coach here, will know if Grubb is still here in a couple of years, how to use this guy right and the right positions and what he does really well. And that's also a bit of an added benefit to this guy coming here. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Good hands, like you were saying, should be quick enough to get behind linebackers in the NFL. I know he didn't test. We don't know what his 40 is. I think he'll be able to get behind linebackers at the NFL level. Has some experience lining up outside as well, which could be interesting here because, again, I think kind of like Hollister, trying to ask him to line up in line is going to be a mess. He's too small. So you're going to have to find creative ways to get him out there. Maybe he'll play a little bit of fullback. He did actually get a handful of carries in his career, mostly early, but he was actually being used like a fullback at one point. Now, we don't talk about that because those were the dark days for Washington when Dylan Morris was the quarterback and we couldn't score. But he did do that a little bit.
So what you're saying is this question we've been asked for years about when is the fullback coming back in the NFL? It's finally happening now with Westover. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's kind of like what the Rams are doing with Skronek. Remember how it's a little like that. I know that Westover is bigger than Skronek, but it's like the same idea of putting a really good receiving threat at that position, and it's a curveball that teams, I think, struggle to deal with because they've like never seen it before.
Well, it's kind of like the Kyle Juszczyk thing with Niners when they don't use him a lot either, but when they ever seem to go to him, it seems to always be mightily effective.
Now, most of his college production was done on simple routes where he's being left wide open because opposing defenses are like, okay, you can have it. We're just not going to get beat over the top by Odunze, or we're not going to get beat over the top by McMillan. You can have that, Westover. And a lot of his production's like that, just like run out a few steps, turn around, wide open, quarterback hits you, go get 6 yards. Not a big yak threat. Doesn't really have the size to be a contested catch guy. And he's not much of a blocker. So there are limitations here, but they're clear limitations. And I feel like as long as you understand what you're getting into with Westover and you're willing to have him occupy a role that is similar to the role that he had in college, you're gonna get some good things here.
I would agree. So I think that with the blocking is not great, but it's not bad. And the effort's certainly there with him to do that stuff. And give him a year in the NFL way program, it can maybe even improve a little bit better. So I like this guy long-term here as to fill into that Farrell Brown role once Farrell maybe if he moves on after this year and you have him on the cheap at that point. It's always going to be good here as we move into being into that contending phase to look at the players we can have on this roster, Brendan, that aren't going to be being paid at a high rate. So you can afford to pay the other guys you want to pay at the other prime positions and have those positions as light in other spots as you can to be able to save that money as much as humanly possible.
Okay, so yeah, Westover, both pretty into him. I think we're both pretty excited to see what he might be able to bring to the table.
Yep.
But probably a practice squad guy year one. That's just no room for him unless somebody gets hurt, and unless I guess maybe you're going to have a fullback heavy offense, which can't imagine Ryan Grubb running a fullback heavy offense right now.
I wouldn't think, but maybe some looks in there that he would feature if you had to call upon him.
Okay, next guy was probably the guy we got that I had the highest grade on. I thought this guy was going to be about a 5th round pick. Ended up going undrafted. It's Garrett Greenfield. Garrett Greenfield, the tackle from South Dakota State. Teammates with Mason McCormick. Him and McCormick were buddies in college, doing everything together next to each other. Garrett playing left tackle, although I do think that he has he played a lot of right tackle and left tackle in college. He can do both. And I'm not completely convinced where he's going to land quite yet, but he brings that flexibility. NFL caliber size as far as tackle goes. He does have short arms, 33.5 inches. Not great. Relatively athletic, extremely explosive. Almost a 39-inch vertical for a tackle is insane. 9'5" broad, which is 91st percentile. So very, very athletic in that regard. And he's been starting for that team basically for 4 years. And they play like 15 games every year because South Dakota State is pretty much always making a run to the championship. They are one of the teams that always dominates their little pool of competition. And pretty good career. But how do you think it's going to work in the NFL?
Oh, did you see him as a guy that's a tackle or guard at the NFL level?
I believe I mostly looked at him as a tackle. I do think there's some possibility of him moving to guard, I guess, but it's not like he's somebody who's unathletic and needs to move inside because he can't handle like edge rushers necessarily. So I did look at him as a tackle, but with guys like this, they could end up pretty much anywhere. I will say this, much more experience blocking in gap schemes than zone schemes in college. So that's notable, but it wasn't enough for me to be like, oh, this is definitely a guard.
Yeah, I think he's to your point, I think he's a little more straight line explosive. Like those vertical numbers showed more than he's maybe laterally explosive. When I watch the tape on him, he tends to, hold up his block well. Your level of competition isn't the greatest out there where they're playing. It's not bad, but it's not the highest level you're going up against. He did a really good job, I think, with the initial heavy hands on every snap. When he first lays his hands into the player, he creates a jolt. He creates the stopping power there that you can kind of feel on the defensive edges, whether in the run game or in pass protection. And that helps him out, I think, mightily, Brennan. When he does have to move his feet a little bit more laterally in pass protection, I think that there can sometimes be some issues. And I might argue this a little bit, maybe why he wasn't drafted here, because of the fact that there's some of those challenges that are there with play with him. But when you do get him going forward, and if you're asking him to kind of get down to the second level and go forward down to the second level versus pulling and going laterally, I think he can do those things really well. Is he a pure fit, though, all the way around in the mobility stuff for this scheme? He's a pretty good fit. Not really, I would say, the pure fit, like a Mike Jerrell might be with his athleticism and his ability to move a little bit better laterally that we took in the 6th round. But a guy that's got some upside to him, Brennan, I think you're right to be excited by him. I think a guy that will fit into making the practice squad here, and a guy that with some of that explosiveness and the size and length stuff that he checks off as far as the prerequisites there's maybe a little bit of something there beneath the surface on this one.
Yeah, I get the sense that there probably is. I think that he plays better on the left side than the right side based on what I was able to put together, which is great because left side's more valuable. 55 starts at SDSU, so absurd amount of college experience. 1,500 snaps on the left side and about 1,500 on the right side, so should be pretty flexible. Also pretty good at using angles to create leg drive to push defenders out of the way against the run. Good punches, good understanding of leverage. Was a 2-time team captain for SDSU. Plays a little out of control sometimes. His footwork needs work. Timing in space needs work. His arm length is a concern. Doesn't sustain blocks as well as you would like. He will make a block and then fall off of it.
I saw that a lot.
Yeah, so there's some stuff to work on here. Oversets against speed rushers and leaves the inside open. He's like scrambling to get outside and then gives up the inside. Happens every now and then. But one thing that I noticed watching the tape, and it was kind of hard for me to describe because I watched them against Northern Iowa because there isn't a heck of a lot of SDSU tape out there. One thing I noticed, his run blocking is like kind of finesse, where he waits for the guy to get to him and then just manhandles him instead of run blocking the way you would typically see it, where it's, aggressive. You're like the aggressor. You're going forward into him. I don't know. It felt different from run blocking that I normally watch when I look at an NFL offensive lineman.
I agree with that. I think he's leaning onto that heavy-handed jolt thing that he's got, where he's always trusting, even if I'm not driving towards you and taking it, you may be coming into me and I'm absorbing it. But as I'm absorbing it, here comes me shooting my hands, and that's going to put you to that standstill point or allow me to drive you off the ball in a run blocker. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But when you pair that, Brendan, with, like you said, that's a little bit of a tendency to have the block slide off of him. That can be a kind of a 1-2 punch that needs to be cleaned up in the long term for him to hope to get on the football field.
Yeah, it was very weird. He run blocks the same way he pass blocks. He just kind of waits for the guy to get into him and then takes care of him. And it worked, but it's not going to work in the NFL.
No, it's not. He's going to have to drive into the guys and get there. But I think that part he'll be able to clean up pretty well. I think the stuff in pass protection, that's why I question about whether he needs to go to guard, because out there on the edge at that point, it's a little bit of, to a lesser degree, like what we talk about with Sataoa, where when he struggles, it's against those edge rushers, or like you said, he's jumping and oversetting, and then that opens up the inside. And why is he oversetting? Because he knows he can't trust his ability to stay with the edge rushers. And so you go, okay, well, does that mean a move to the inside long term? And I don't know. I don't have an answer for it, but I do wonder on that.
Right. So I see Greenfield on the practice squad. I think that he'll make the practice squad. And unless he gets poached, which I think is unlikely, he was a UDFA. Teams had multiple chances to draft him and never did. So I think that we will get him as a practice squatter for a year, and then next year maybe it'll be like between him and Jerrell, who gets to be the backup left tackle with some upside.
There you go. It'll be a hell of a battle between the two of those guys. So,
all right. Next guy, and this is kind of the last guy who I think has a realistic path forward on this team in the near future, Nelson Caesar. Nelson Caesar of the Houston Cougars, edge rusher. Another guy that I thought would get drafted. I had him going in like the 5th round, 6th round area. Did not happen. And I was really happy to get him. Relatively productive the last 3 years on that Houston defense, mostly the last 2 years. I will say this. I feel like if he had stayed back in college for one more year, which I think he could have, he probably would have been like a top 100 pick next year with the way he was going, but chose not to. What do you think?
I like how this kid's put together. 6'3", 254, 33 and 5" long arms. So long arms. He's got that long arm bull rush we saw from Derek Hall last year that was at the forefront of his game that he uses predominantly in his pass rush for success. He's doesn't have a lot of different moves he brings in a player, chaining pass rush moves together. I would say that that's something that, to your points, would have come along better, I think, next year. And again, to your point, would have elevated his draft stock had he gone back for one more year. But I did think that he played good, strong football this year for the team. 2-year starter, 2023 team captain. Good common element that we're getting with a lot of these guys, whether we're in the draft or UDFAs, Brendan, is multiple years starting, a lot of playing time on the football field. These aren't just kind of one-year wonders that we're getting, one-hit wonders, if you were. I love his strength and power and ability to set the edge there in the run game. I think he's going to do a very good job of potentially pushing Darrell Taylor on this team in a major way, especially Darrell Taylor if he's going to be up that $3 million cost versus this guy who would come in at such a cheaper cost. And if Seattle does that math, like you say, Brendan, saying, well, he would have been a top 100 player. Well, okay, we'll make him with Draymond Jones out there on the edge, and now that puts our edges at 3 deep as it is, and this guy becomes the 4th. He's really not on the field that much as it is. We can have him kind of developing in-house for that 1 year and see if he can tap into that potential and that ability. So I really like this kid and what he brings. Good understanding on the leverage game, gets his hands in there with some strength and some power. He's got a little bit of dip and a little bit of bend. It's not at the forefront of his game. I think there is some pass rush upside to him, but I think he can just bring potentially an overall competent level of play to the edge position in where his upside is, which for UDFA is not the worst of, to me, upsides to be looking at in a guy.
Yeah, I could see this guy making the 53-man one day. I don't think it's going to happen this year. I think that we've got enough going on at the edge position. Like even if Taylor doesn't make the team, then Caesar, maybe he gets to play a little bit because people get hurt. That would be about it. But I think there could be something here. If this guy had stayed in college one more year, I think he would have been one of the better edge rushers in the class in 2025. Main reason why he didn't take off in 2023 was he missed time. He played less than 600 snaps in 2023. So his numbers didn't explode the way they could have, but they still were really good. And I feel like 2024, he would have just gone off and maybe been like that 3rd round pick.
In my opinion, Brendan, and it's not just trying to be a homer on this, but I think with Holani, Westover, Caesar, and these guys that we're looking at all had agents that I think smartly guided them and directed them to the right spot. Because we always think about UDFAs of being guys of, well, what's your chances of making the roster? If you're gonna be a UDFA guy, you want to have that spot where there's a pathway to go get that roster spot. And I kind of almost think even with Hayden Haddon, we can apply this a little bit too, where what these guys did instead, Brendan, is I think they went a year out. Their agent went to them and said, you're going to be here on the practice squad for a year, but you're going to be in a great organization. You're going to a year to get yourself prepared to compete that next year. And then when we get to that next year, they're going to lose some guys off of the contracts. They're going to have some openings that aren't necessarily there immediately, that then you can take advantage of a year from now and really make that roster and have a chance to shine. And good on the agents to explain it to the players that way. Good on the players to accept that, because I think it's a little bit different than we normally see, Brendan, with these UDFAs looking more for that active roster spot that they could go get. I don't think Hayden Haddon comes here thinking that he's really got an opportunity to go get an active roster spot, but does look at it a year from now going, year from now, Tyler Lockett retires. What happens to the DK situation? No Derek Young here anymore. Maybe there's an opening there for me.
Right. So with Nelson Caesar, he's got a pretty good first step and he's got a little bit of bend, and that's not bad for a UDFA. You're not going to find a UDFA that has a ton of bend and a ton of first step quickness. that he wouldn't be a UDFA then. No. But for a guy you're getting at this part of the process, really good, actually. He's got stack and shed abilities that you typically do not find in a player of this level. I think he's got a pretty good ability to get guys off of him. He's got a strong upper body to bull rush. He's got a legitimate bull rush. Contact balance is great. That's one thing that I wrote down here. Also has a little bit of experience dropping into coverage. I think he'll be okay at it. So I think he's a great fit for a 3-4 defense.
Especially when wants to do those drops with guys at times with the complexity that we want to run.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying this means a lot, but he did play a little bit of stack linebacker at Houston. There was one game last year where he had like 30 plus snaps inside because of injuries. I don't know if that's going to mean anything at the NFL level, but it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool that he was able to do that. Most players wouldn't be able to.
Again, you never know with Mike Brennan. He might line him up as an outside 9 tech and end up turning him into the will post snap. That's just the way McDonald rolls.
Right. Absolutely. So a little disjointed with some of his pass rush moves. I like that he has pass rush moves at all. A lot of people, a lot of players coming out don't. They just get by on speed or power. But they're a little disjointed, little weak against the run, doesn't diagnose the run plays properly, doesn't read the run blocking quite right. But overall, I think we did really well for ourselves here. This is a guy I thought would be about a 5th round pick. Getting him in UDFA, I think was a really good one. This was one of my favorites, to me, right up there with Greenfield. And I could see Nelson Caesar being part of the edge rotation in 2025.
Absolutely could see it. Yeah, it's a guy that has some upside that you talked about. If he'd come back from a final year, it's a guy that, while he's not perfect in either playing the run or getting after it as a pass rusher, he is competent in both of those areas and has upside in both of those 2 areas, which these are rare things that you're going to find in a guy as a UDFA. And like you, I had him in the 5th round as well. So a tremendous get. As I said, part of the reason I drew my grade up for our Seattle Seahawks to an A- off of a B+ immediately, Brendan, was that to me, you have to factor in the UDFA class. The fact that they stopped at the end of the 6th round and had that whole 7th round where all those other teams were out there trying to figure out who they're picking, and they were able to be on the phone lines, burning those phone lines up to bring in a George Holani, a Nelson Caesar, a Garrett Greenberg. That's what made this class, to me, that bump that little bit extra up and really made this class.
All right. One more guy for me. And if you have another UDFA that you think is worth going into, we can definitely do that. But there's one more guy that I actually deep dove into here.
Okay.
And it's Hayden Hatton, who you mentioned a couple times a minute ago. As of right now, I don't know if there's a path for him, but I think he's clearly a good player who could maybe surprise people and make the practice squad. We don't have as many practice squad holdovers as we typically do at receiver. Like a couple years ago, we had guys that were just always on the practice squad, or Sua and Aaron Fuller and a couple other guys too. Yeah, and it feels like those guys are getting purged, so there's an opportunity for a guy like Hayden Hatton to make it, and starting to feel like he will. So Idaho Vandals, 24 years old, about average in terms of size overall, kind of short arms. Did not run a very good 40. He had an excellent vertical though, 39 inches. That was the main highlight of his pro day, which was otherwise pretty mediocre at best. Very productive career at Idaho though. So what do you think?
So, good straight line guy. Excellent contested catcher. A really good timer and leaper on the football. Really good on tracking the ball to time up that leap and get himself in the right position to go up and make a catch. You can be pretty much assaulting him and he will still go up there and make that catch at times. So really, really nice skill set he brings with that. That's something that I think he brings into the room day one with him, even at an NFL level. He is a guy that is bigger. And when you have him start to have to get laterally as receivers have to get, when he's got to take that going full speed, take a lateral step, he slows down tremendously at that point. He's not a pinpoint route running receiver in how he runs his routes either on the other side of it. Hands very soft, very competent catcher of the football. No doubt about that there, and a very long, big catch radius. But as far as the route running and lateral explosiveness, I think that stuff does become things that hold him back long term to really developing into a player in this league. but I do agree with your assessment that he is likely to be a guy that is going to make this practice squad.
Yeah, I suspect that he will at this point. He's got great hands. I think that's the main thing he brings to the table here. Really good hands, really strong hands. They're not big. They're actually pretty small hands as far as receivers go, but really good at just snatching the ball out. He's not fast. He actually ran like a 4.63 40, which is not good at all, but he's kind of found this almost Tyler Lockett-like way to be a deep threat because he's good at tracking the ball and good at like using his body to box out players down the field. So he's kind of a deep threat without being fast, which is, pretty there's some value there. I'm not saying it's going to translate perfectly to the NFL, but it should be pretty good. Pretty good in the open field as well. Can kind of run like a punt returner almost when he gets the ball in his hands. Good route running abilities, productive to all three levels of the field. Good in traffic, a lot of contested catches, even though he's a smaller guy. I will say sometimes it feels like he doesn't care about getting open because he trusts himself in traffic, which that probably needs to stop in the NFL. Contested catches are not going to be as easy when he's playing against NFL competition. But overall, I was pretty impressed with what I saw from Hayden Hatton. I was watching tape from his game against Albany, which I think was like a playoff game for Idaho, and made a lot of plays out there, had a monster game. And, his quarterback is not good. He does not have good quarterback play out there. So I really liked most of what I saw from Hayden Hatton as well.
Yeah, I like him as a developmental guy. Definitely, I don't think he's ready to get on the field right now, but a guy that maybe can develop a little bit more down the road with some of that route running and work on a little bit of that, just a bit of that lateral explosiveness, because the lack of straight line speed with the lack of lateral explosiveness can be a 1-2 death knell for you as a wide receiver. But do love his hands, do love his catching ability, love his ability to go up and get those contested catch situations, but just needs to kind of round out the skill set a little bit.
He uses his leaping ability well as a receiver as well, by the way. His ability to go up and get jump balls, it's notable. You see it enough to where you're like, that's something he can do in the NFL.
Yeah, I think you occasionally win those situations, just can't lean on it fully like he did a little bit at times in college.
Doesn't break a lot of tackles, doesn't survive contact all that often, not that kind of player. Probably not going to be much of a run blocker either. He's not got enough power, so I wouldn't count on any of that. But this is a guy who could be what we were hoping somebody like Cade Johnson would have been. Like, this might be the actual Cade Johnson.
Maybe. I mean, he's a little different than Cade. Cade's a smaller cat and was a little bit more of a route running guy at times. But yeah, the developmental role that Cade wasn't able to take advantage of, this guy can maybe fit into and fill. And like you said, I think you've turned over a lot of the guys that have been here for just kind of a couple of years, kind of hanging around, but not ever really Cody Thompson types, not really ever making the really much of any kind of impact on the field.
Yeah. And last year lined up about 200 snaps in the slot. So that's something he's starting to add to his repertoire. And that's something that he may need to do in the NFL because it's going to be harder to beat press on the outside when you're going up against those bigger corners.
Especially if he can't lead with route running at the forefront at times too.
All right. That's all I had for the UDFAs. Was there anybody else that you thought jumped out?
I think the rest of the guys are just kind of part of the stack. I think the guys we mentioned are the main guys that stood out to me. Rotorns could maybe be a pretty good player, but I don't want to talk too much about it because I just think it's on the outside looking in, especially with where the corner position is for him on this team. Could he land as a UDFA guy and that hangs on the practice squad? Sure, he could, but I don't necessarily see him pushing for anything on it or any of them being real notable beyond that. So my guys on this would be really Holani as the fourth guy, Westover is your tight end, who's probably on this active roster a year from now, and as you said, maybe Nelson Caesar that becomes part of the edge rotation next year. Maybe not at the forefront of it, but finds his way to get a couple snaps by next year at that time. I think those are the three guys I really do laser in on.
Okay, so I think we did it. I think we went through the rookie class. It's a good class. It's a class that I feel good about. It's, I think, got a lot of guys who are going to be meaningful contributors to this team over the next several years. And I think that in tandem with the drafts we've had over the previous 2 years, we've got a really good young core going on this team right now. And hopefully We just have the right coaches to take advantage of it.
I don't think we'll be looking at this as a question of talent over the next couple of years, that we don't have enough talent. It'll be a question of, if things don't fail, that we didn't quite, like it's been, I think, even recently, where there's been a little bit of underperformance in both of our minds, Brendan, on this team recently. And that is that you have been a little bit held back by the lack of coaching. And this is the big part to take advantage of, to take this team a little bit further ahead. But I agree with you. I think they have more than laid their foundation here with these past 3 drafts. The extra picks from the Russell Wilson trade, the leaning back into the value-based model mindset, which again, you can see, Brendan, at the forefront of this draft, as it's been at the last 2 drafts, and how starkly different that looks versus the drafts that we've been running 5 and 6 years prior to these past 3 years drafts. And that you can see them kind of having a light bulb moment where this is what we need to be doing. We've been doing it wrong. This is the right way to do it. And we're going to stay in this lane, and we're going to stay in this lane hard. So I'm very hopeful for this future. I love this draft class, and I don't know if next year's the year that we're going to start to see all the fruits of this really bear out, but I think it's going to be sooner than later. And this with the coaching could be a match made in heaven with the young talent you have brought in here.
All right. So that's, I think that's the end of the show. And again, this might be it for a while. June's going to be nice and peaceful, hopefully. The only things that could happen would be like somebody gets arrested, or somebody wants a trade, or somebody wants a new contract, and we don't want any of those things, right? That's for other teams.
That's right. We just want nice peace, serenity. You can hear little birds tweeting, Brendan, fields of grass growing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just sun.
Right. Yeah. So we might not be hooking up for a little while here. Probably once you get into July, with some of the training camp stuff starting to really pick up. August is the preseason. By then we'll definitely be doing stuff, but for now it's probably going to be pretty chill. So Thank you everybody for coming out today. You've been a great audience. Thank you, Brandon, for doing this with me. Can't wait to pick it up whenever there's stuff to talk about, but probably going to be a little while.
Yeah. We'll be back though soon. So this stuff rounds 10s in the summer, especially Pacific Northwest summers. You know how fast those go. So it'll turn around quick.
All right. So thank you everybody for coming out. I will be seeing you guys soon. And at this point, it was a really good, since the season ended, I feel like this team has done pretty much everything right. I like what they did with their coaching. I like what they did with their front office. I like what they did with their free agency and draft. I think they're pushing the right buttons. I think they're doing the right things. So all that's left for us is to wait and hope that it actually bears results in 2024 when the season starts. So we're going to say it, we're going to hit it, and then we're going to go ahead and get on out of here. So thank you, everybody. Good night, and go Hawks.
Go Hawks.